Today we're going to show you how to replace your chain and sprockets on your sport quad. This is going to be a similar process for most machines, and we're going to be showing you how to do it on our Yamaha Blaster. Now with this stuff, it's something that most people are going to be able to do this pretty easily at their house just with some common hand tools. But before you replace your parts, you want to inspect them. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got. Now to inspect your parts, you don't have to remove anything, but just to better show the process, we've gone ahead and removed our wheel. So one of the easiest ways to check all of the parts together and fastest ways is at the 3 o'clock position on the back of the sprocket. Just pull on one of the links and see how far the chain comes away from the teeth. If you've got more than a third of that tooth showing, then you know all of these parts are worn down and they need to be replaced. So that's the easiest way to check for wear on these parts. But if you're not convinced or not sure if this stuff is worn out, on the sprockets, you want to make sure both sides of the tooth are symmetrical. If they are not, then that is an indicator of wear. Now on the chains, a lot of times you'll see kinks in them. Maybe they can be rusted up or even missing O-rings if it's an O-ring type chain. So those are indicators you need to replace it. Or in your owner's manual, you can take a pin to pin measurement and see how far that is worn down. But again, pulling straight back on this is the easiest way to check for wear, and if you do it during your routine maintenance, you're going to start seeing when that's wearing down. For parts, we have our primary drive chain and sprocket kit, but we have a lot of different options on our website as well. So whether you're looking to go with stock gearing or change it to change the power delivery of your machine, now's a good time to do that, or at least look into that as well. And when we're in here, we're also going to be looking at our chain guide, our rollers, and all that kind of stuff. And if anything is worn out, you definitely want to get it replaced. Now, the grease on these chains is pretty nasty, so we're going to be using some rubber gloves, and I also have some blue Loctite. The tools to get the job done are going to vary from machine to machine, but really you just need some common hand tools. Now, a few things I want to point out are, number one, these Master Link pliers. These are going to help you remove the clip on your Master Link and get it installed. And some machines, you're going to need some snap ring pliers, so you might want to look at your manual ahead of time, see what you need. Other than that, the main thing I want to point out is this chain press tool, or this is the chain riveting tool from Tusk. This is going to come with everything you need to get the job done. So if you have an O-ring chain, you're definitely going to need to press that Master Link together, and you're also going to need something to press the old one apart. So if you want to go cheaper, we have a couple options on the website, or if you want the deluxe kit, that's available as well. And then other than that, like I said, it's just common hand tools. We're going to be using safety glasses and some rags. The next step is to remove the fasteners holding on your rear sprocket. Now with this, ours has some locking tabs. Not every machine is going to have this, but we need to bend those over so we can remove the nuts. Now before we completely remove the sprocket or disconnect our chain, we want to go to the front of the machine and loosen any hardware holding that front sprocket on. To gain access to the front sprocket, you're going to have a guard typically. So sometimes that's just going to be a couple bolts right over that sprocket, but for us this is the whole left side engine cover. So we're going to remove that. Now like I said, with our sprocket we have the 2 bolts and the retaining plate, but on some sprockets you might just have one nut right here, and that's why you want to leave some of the hardware in that rear sprocket, so you can have somebody hold the brake and then you're going to be able to loosen the nut. Or if you don't have anybody helping you, you can use a gear jammer or a rag and stuff that between the chain and that rear sprocket. Next you want to rotate your axle, and we're going to find our Master Link. So this one is the clip type, so we just need to remove that and press it apart. Some of these are going to be press fit, so if that's the case with yours, you're going to want to grind the ends off and then press that through. You just want to pop that off, and then we could use a press tool to remove this outer plate, but since we're not going to be using any of this, I'm just using a chisel and a hammer, and it's going to be quicker to pop it off. Remove that Master Link and we'll pull the chain through. And then just to get that Master Link off, I temporarily installed 2 nuts. I'm going to pull those back off. We'll remove our sprocket. We're going to make sure all the mounting surfaces are clean. Now to install your new sprocket, typically these markings are going to be facing out, but pay attention to where these tapers are on your sprocket if you're using tapered hardware. Ours is made for multiple machines, so we actually don't use those. But we're going to install this, and Again, I'm just going to temporarily install 2 of these nuts to hold this in place. And we're going to change out the front sprocket and install our chain. Now we can remove this front sprocket. You want to pay attention to how it comes off because sometimes they're offset just a little bit. So this side has a little step on it. So that's how we're going to install the new one. Back side is completely flat. You want to make sure these splines on the counter shaft are clean. And then to install the new sprocket, I'm applying a light film of grease to these splines just so it doesn't rust in place. I'm going to wipe the extra grease off. Then we have this retaining plate. I'm going to slide that on and then I rotate it until it lines up with the 2 mounting holes in the sprocket. And then I'm just going to temporarily install both of these bolts. We're going to torque them down once we have our chain on. Now when we did our inspection, we noticed that the chain guide was almost worn through and that the rollers had some play in them. So we're replacing those items while we're here. From here, we're ready to install our new chain. So I'm just going to wrap this around and feed it through the chain guide. So with these chain and sprocket kits, you can see this chain doesn't reach all the way around. So we need to move our axle forward so we can get the master link installed onto this. You're going to have a few different varieties of this depending on what machine you have. So ours, we've got 2 bolts going all the way through. We need to loosen those up and then move our adjusters in so the axle can move forward. Some machines you're going to have 2 bolts on each side and then the bearing carrier is going to rotate forward or backward to give you slack. And the last style you're going to have some pinch bolts in the back. So you just loosen the pinch bolts and again the bearing carrier where it's offset, that's what's giving you your slack, and you can usually just use a punch to rotate that where you need it. Now if you have this style of adjuster, there are some marks we can look at to make sure we get everything even. But one of the easiest ways to keep track of everything is just turn these the same number of turns. So with that loosened up, pulled on that chain, everything lines up now. So from here we can install the master link. Now before I install the master link, I do want to point out, if you're doing custom gearing and you have a longer chain, maybe you have a 120 link and you need to cut some excess off. Number 1, make sure you mark it in the correct position. You don't want to cut it too short. And number 2, you do want to grind the ends of those pins off just like if you had a press fit master link. And the reason you want to do that is as you're pressing this through, you don't want to damage the part of the chain that you're keeping. So just keep those tips in mind. Now from here, we need to add some grease to our master link. This comes in the kit. And we're going to install our X-rings. And once you have both of those X-rings or O-rings installed, press the master link on. We'll grease up the other 2 O-rings. Then we're just making sure everything is nice and greased up. Then I'm going to put the outer plate on. I'll push that on as far as I can by hand. And then I'm going to use the chain press to press it the rest of the way on. Now with the chain press, you have this support plate that's going to go on the back side of the master link to make sure the pins don't get pressed through. And then the front side, we're going to be using the plate with the 2 holes in it. And those are just going to go around the master link pins. We'll set that over the link and we're going to tighten it down. And as you do that, you just want to make sure you don't over tighten it. We're just going to go just far enough that it exposes the grooves for that master link. And a good way to gauge that is look at the distance on the other O-rings or X-rings, and you just want to match that with the master link. And if you're not sure where you're at, it's a good idea to back the tool off and double check it and just make sure you don't go too far. So it looks like we're right on the money right there. We've just barely exposed those grooves, so we can go ahead and install the master link clip. So we've got that fat opening. That's going to go over the first pin. And you'll notice that this closed side, as long as it's on this top run, it's facing forward. And this is just going the direction of the chain. That way, if this happens to catch on anything, it's going to stay in place. If you flipped it around and the open end was going forward, if it caught on anything, it could pop off. So that's just one thing you can do to keep it safe. So we've got that popped in. You want to make sure it's all the way in the grooves, which ours is. So from here, we need to install the retaining plates. We're going to torque the nuts down, and then we're also going to be installing some Loctite on the 2 front mounting bolts and torquing those as well. And again, to get that front hardware torqued to spec, you can have somebody hold the brake. The next thing you want to do is install your case saver or that left side engine cover. The next step is to adjust the chain. So we're just going to use the adjusters we talked about earlier. And typically you're going to want to have about 1.25 inches to 1.5 inches of free play. You do want to check your manual and double check your spec. So we'll go ahead and adjust that up. So right here we have about 1.25 inches of free play. Once you have your chain adjusted where you want it, you're going to tighten down the axle carrier bearing bolts as well as the adjuster bolts. And as I do this, I'm just taking all the tension out of the chain. That way I make sure the axle's up as far as it can go. Once you have your chain adjusted where you want it, I'm just going to take a rag, put that between the chain and the sprocket. We're going to tighten down these axle carrier bearing bolts. Then we're going to tighten up the adjuster bolts, and having this rag in between the sprocket and the chain is just going to make sure the axle is as far forward as possible and we keep the correct adjustment. The last thing you need to do is install your wheel and torque the fasteners down. That's all there is to replacing the chain and sprockets on your sport quad. Now again, we use this primary drive chain and sprocket kit. It's available on our website, and the nice thing about the kit is that you're not going to have to do any cutting. It's really simple to put on. So you might want to check that out. We offer free shipping on orders over $75. And if you want to see more helpful content like this, subscribe to our channel. I'm Charles with Rocky Mountain ATV MC. Keep those fasteners torqued.